all here for the Meeting the Moment training. I am here as a representative of the organization that is hosting this training, which is the Center for Applied Research Solutions, known inevitably as CARS, which is a terrible acronym because it means pretty much cannot Google us. I am also here representing the project, which is funding this, which is a SAMHSA-funded project, and it is the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, which is a mouthful. We're just about to start year 6 of the project, so I can finally say that pretty much in one breath. So this project, the MHTTCs are a network of regional centers. So we are pleased to be the TA provider for Region 9, which includes California, Hawaii, Nevada, Arizona, and the Pacific Islands. So our mandate with this project, the federal government has tasked us with supporting the regional behavioral health workforce, which when we started this, we were like, what does that even mean? It's a broad mandate. We provide a lot of different services through this project. We're primarily a technical assistance and training organization. So we do webinars, we do resource development, we do tools and tip sheets and resource lists. We also do some level of individual TA consultation. So if you have a question and you need a thought partner or some resources, feel free to hit us up. We have a lot of really great school mental health folks on our team who would be happy to connect. And now what you've all actually been waiting for is my absolute pleasure to introduce our hostesses for today. But before we do that, I just want to take one moment to say how this came to fruition. I think many of you may have known Heidi and Lindsay from the excellent work they have done through our contract with HCA. This content that they developed has been presented in various forms and webinars and other kinds of trainings and open houses. And this is material that I think is so important. And when I was talking to Lindsay a little bit before the training, I was thinking about the years that this has been in the making. And when we did these online versions of this, or these webinar-based versions, we heard from all of you that you wanted and needed this training to happen in person, and that there were school leaders in Orange County who needed to know this content. And so I'm so happy to see you all here and to have this opportunity to deliver this wonderful content. And so without further ado, I will introduce Pete and Heidi.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's so great to see you. There's a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. I'm excited to see you all here today. I just wanted to start by thanking Miranda and CARS and the whole team there, Ingrid, Tina, who's walking in, you met downstairs, Stephen, who's back there with headphones here. For making this happen and for flying down to make an event out of it, and also for believing in us and for taking a chance on this content. You can tell by the name that we gave the training today. I think we're all aware that this is some tough stuff, especially right now in our moment that we're in. So hopefully today we can give you some tools to take out and really kind of meet the challenges that we're facing supporting these kids.
So yes, it's so great to be here with some old friends and some new friends. And we knew that for this training, we needed a new kind of title, if you will, and that's why we added Meeting the Moment, because we know that right now, a lot of intense debate and conflict around supporting our most vulnerable students. And I really want to thank everyone for being the leaders that you are, for being here today, for taking a stand and being prepared and asking for the tools to support these students. And we hope today that we prepared nice little kit, if you will, of strategies and supports and information that will help you in your roles.
You mentioned, I think that the time that we're living in right now is unprecedented in so many ways, both in positive ways. The supports that we're able to offer really have come so far, and the work that we're doing has really come so far. And at the same time, we're facing some pushback, right? And we know in our local county, there's school board conversations that are happening, and our kids are kind of stuck in the middle. A lot of times when we train, we talk about risk data, risk and prevention data, and basically what the lived experiences are like at school for our LGBTQ plus or our queer population or our transgender and gender diverse specifically. But one thing that we want to kind of focus on today is how kind of the rhetoric that we're hearing in this public conversation that's happening around transgender and gender diverse, specifically minors or children, what that's doing to those kids, right? So what we know is that they are affected by this rhetoric. When we look at the data, what we see is that bullying has actually gone up in the last couple years. And a lot of times what we also see there is that where the students are reporting feeling harassment is from adults, that there's been an increase in that as well, right? And that might be other kids' families, that might be staff, right? So they're in a position where they're fielding this stuff. Everybody's having a public conversation about them that is quite frankly not so informed about them or their experience, and not so gracious in the way that they're talking about them and their right to exist, really, in public. So one of the things that a parent said when she was talking about what it's like for her child to go to school, she said, it's like, sending my kid into a hailstorm every day, like just walking through a hailstorm.
So I don't know about you, but sometimes I have to put myself on a news diet because, the news can be so overwhelmingly negative, and I can feel it kind of internalizing and affecting me and my worldview because I like to stay positive. And so if we let a lot of what we see in the news, because it does kind of focus on that negative, we start to believe or have misperceptions. And so you see here headlines that indicate or demonstrate that districts are not changing policies like a domino effect. Everyone is not failing. The majority of districts in California have stuck to the supportive, inclusive policies, best practices for LGBT students. You can see here 19 have been recognized for outstanding support. LAUSD is second largest district in the nation, standing strong, and also several here in Orange County. And so we just want to bring light to this, that sometimes when we hear too much of the wrong things, we get that wrong idea. And so you're here meeting the moment, but so are many of our districts. And that's because of the great staff they have, like you, who are out there working on behalf of our students.
So right now we want to just kind of have a discussion with you, a little bit of a conversation about some of the myths that are coming up. We're calling them like myths of the moment, and think about ways that you can speak to those from your positions.
Myth number one, schools are hiding things from parents by not telling them when kids come out.
What do y'all think?
What was the district that was saying that they want parents or teachers to, it's Orange?
Right.
Yeah, that's really close to home. They want them to report to parents. It's the kid that's hiding.
We had an ally type training at one of my middle schools, and this was a question of one of the staff members asked, one of the teachers asked this, almost word for word. And she even said it from that perspective, I'm a parent, and I worry about my student, my child having these conversations at school with that.
Anyone else? How many of you are parents? Same. Of course we want to know what's going on with our kids, right? Of course we want to know. And also, if my child doesn't feel ready to tell me that, I want to know that if they are in desperate need for help, they're going to find it somewhere in the village. So I've been doing this work for a long time now, and really, honestly, it's been a privilege to get to focus on this work almost exclusively for about the last 10 years. And working with these kids, why do you think they come out at school first?
Is support when you're safe.
So
They don't always come out at school first, but a lot of times they do. Most of the time they do, right? I think it's about 6 in 10. And that's across intersectional data. And it also doesn't necessarily, like for example, if they have parents that they think are going to be supportive, or a family support network that they think is going to be supportive, that doesn't mean they're going to come out at home first. They still might come out at school first. Why? Because they can lose us. That's okay. That's okay. Because home is more important more crucial, more critical to their survival and their emotional well-being, right? It gives them the opportunity to try it out. It gives them the opportunity to have this conversation out loud with an adult human almost before doing it with such a high level of risk. Does that make sense? As far as schools hiding things, this is not true. We're required to follow laws, and there are laws about what we can share and can't share. And this is not the only thing that we're not allowed to share, as y'all know, right? So also, there's lots of stuff. A student can leave our school site and go to a medical clinic and get reproductive care, and we can't say a word about that. They don't need parental consent. We don't need to call their parents and tell them. In fact, we're not allowed to, right? So this is not the only thing. There's several things that we can't share by law. It's not like we're just deciding, right? Another thing that I think is important is that when we're doing identity support planning, we know that the bigger this kid's support circle, the better off they will be. So we don't want to exclude anyone. We want to bring everyone into the process at the student's comfort level. So that's a conversation we're constantly having, Do your parents know? Does your family know? Who do you live with? Why or why not? Is that something that, we can help you with? Those kinds of things. Okay. Any questions on this one? All right.
All right, next one. Learning about queer people will cause kids to change their identity and become queer or trans, e.g., me, Belia,
Yeah, and I hate to put those kinds of words up on a PowerPoint, but these are words that we hear at school board meetings now. So I think it's important that we call it out because it's what's being said by trustees, right? What do y'all think about this one?
Perpetuates the fear. I think when I hear it in my previous unnamed district board, they're trying to stem this fear within a community that this may this is my personal opinion, may or may not be happening. And I think that perpetuation of this fear gets possible unknowledge, I can't think of a better word, of the families that are unaware of this to be fearful of that. Heavily religious families as well. We've also that kind of are just fearful. I think they don't have the knowledge, and so they just dive into it.
Yeah, there's this contagion fear, and that's been popular for decades, right? It kind of keeps coming back. But identity is not contagious. You can't catch your identity. You are who you are, right? This is not how that happens. Also, one thing that we do know is learning about different types of people increases civility, empathy, understanding of others, community. Yeah. If learning only about cisgender and straight people made you cisgender and straight, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
No one in my generation would have ever come out. Also, just to be clear, that equating queer people, and when I say the word queer, y'all know that I mean like an umbrella term, right? You might be familiar mostly with LGBTQ. Our training, we talk a lot about transgender or gender diverse, and then you might hear us use the word queer, and that's kind of like an umbrella term for all of those things. But equating queer people with these terms is highly offensive and extremely inaccurate. Okay, I think we have one more.
Schools are providing hormones to kids without parental knowledge.
So I know, you're in a room of school people if you get laughter on that one, right? But people think this. Actually, I've had school personnel tell me this, that's what the wellness centers are built for. And just so that obviously this is categorically false. We can't even give Tylenol to kids. Cough drop.
No.
I have a 10-year-old who had like a SPF chapstick that was confiscated at school because it was medicated, right? We have nothing to do with this stuff at school. And just so that you know, for the sake of having the knowledge to share if you need to, there is not one state in our country where you can access hormone therapy without parental consent. Okay? Any questions on that one? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the law. How familiar are y'all with the law? Show of thumbs, like you got it down, you've been looking at it forever, not sure, don't know it. Okay, cool. So we've got like some mediums and some most of it. So the bold things are kind of like the main points, right? And I have a slide here for you with an outline if your brain works better that way. Mine certainly does. But before we get there, this one has the ed code, okay? So the things that really we want to highlight for you is that these kiddos have the same rights to free speech, the same rights to privacy as everybody else, okay? That means they can wear a pin that says they, them. They can wear a pin in 6th grade or 5th grade or whenever that says pan, right? Bi, that's free speech, right? Not only that, there are 2 laws that require us to protect these kids. And not just these kids, but each other, staff as well, okay? So schools have a duty to protect students and staff from bias, discrimination, and harassment. Okay, well, if you see on my slides SOGIE, that's sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And then we're required to intervene if we witness discrimination, harassment, right? I know at school sometimes when we say the word bullying, our brain just shuts off, like, don't talk to me anymore about bullying. But if we're talking about on that one, what the law says in intimidation, that's kind of like the lowest bar right there, the lowest hanging fruit. Intimidation, what does that look like? If a student walks into a classroom and says, there's only 2 genders, and writes it on the board, as I've been getting calls about when we start school again, right? Kids come back from the summer and they've got a lot to say. That's intimidation. That's harassment. We have a duty to intervene. But how do we do it? How does our staff know how to do it, right? We have to give them those tools. Most of our staff have not been trained. Even you all here today who found out about this because you're in this work, you're looking for it, like 75% of you, this is your first gender identity training, right? On the thing. Okay, couple other things just to point out. The gender ID recognition for state records. Y'all know that non-binary is a legal gender in the state of California, male, female, non-binary. So that exists in SIS and CalPADS as well. Okay, and then also, if a student comes in and says, hey, my identifying information is incorrect and I want to correct it, that's not a legal name change, right? But we can make those corrections in our SIS systems, in Aries and Synergy, et cetera. With their gender, we don't need any legal documentation to make that correction on their permanent record. Okay, make sense?
Okay.
Yep. With their gender identity, we don't need legal documentation to make that correction on their CalPADS record. Okay.
But I feel like there's a but.
No, but if you update something in Aries or in Synergy, people who have access to the parent portal will see it. Yeah. So when you're doing an identity support plan with a student, that's something to go over. And that's why there's a thorough section about that. Okay?
So with the School Success and Opportunity Act, that was part of legislation that built on previous legislation that continued to build and define more rights and support for students over the decades. And so about 10 years ago, this law was passed. And unfortunately, in some places, it got the nickname of the bathroom bill. We really want to highlight that that's not what this was about. The bathrooms is just one small issue that's indicated in this legislation, but it's really about what it's called, school success and opportunity. Because when we look at educational outcomes, academics, college rates, those numbers plummet when we look at LGBT populations and especially our transgender students. So again, we want to focus on this is about school success. You see here also the ed code. And then some of the other things that are included in this legislation include the right to request affirmed names and pronouns, having access to extracurricular activities, that's another thing that we want to increase access to for our students, especially when we're looking at promoting equity. And it also talks about access to facilities, which we'll also talk about when we get to the IDSP.
And those of you, this link down here, I think I added that last time at Tinker. So if they sent it out the PDF, it might not be on there, but it's an updated legal guidance from CSBA, which is really good and includes current case law. That came out in May 2022, right? So definitely look for that.
We're looking at different strategies at the to support your work in your individual departments as well as district-wide. There are lots of things that are already included in your required policies, right? You have your Title IX, you have your anti-discrimination, anti-bullying, suicide prevention. All those are already required. And so the idea here, the strategy is to integrate additional pieces to those policies, almost like an addendum, to include our gender diverse students, or SOGI, the sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. So that's one piece. The other way of looking at it is looking at this as a foundation for best practices. So if you integrate those practices into what's required, that's using the existing laws. And then when you want to take it to the next step, you can actually have more inclusive policies that provide more details about equity, enrollment, health issues, and other forms of protection. And that can be a board policy in itself. And so that board policy is 5145.3. So several districts in Orange County have that policy. And as Lindsay mentioned on the last slide, CSBA has templates. And so when you create that policy on its own, it again provides more of a foundational piece for the district to stand on when they want to ensure that, again, that we're promoting equity, that we're allowing students to have full access to all of the services that they need to build and thrive and reach their goals.
And if you want to try and bring this policy forward in your district, reach out to us and we'll send you a copy.
So these are just a list of other strategies. I'm sure many of them are familiar to you, and we use them in many other areas, for example, behavior issues or other interventions. But some of the strategies that we want to emphasize include the GSAs. And I know that we have lots of GSA supporters in the room today. One of the things I want to highlight about GSAs is that research shows that GSAs actually increase educational outcomes and safety for all students, not just LGBT students. It actually impacts the entire student body. So if someone questions, well, this is only helping a few students, that's not true. It's actually impacting the entire environment because it promotes safety, inclusiveness, connectedness, and it brings students together. And I know when we work on several GSA projects, the number of students that showed up and the allies that showed up was just amazing. We were so excited to see that because that really reinforced exactly what we had read in the research. So that is definitely one of our favorite strategies. And also, for example, many of you, I'm sure, involved with MTSS or student consultation teams, student success teams. We have to be aware, are there issues, when it comes to gender, identity, or even expression, are those included in that process? If we're just looking at the student without including all parts of the student, then we're disregarding some very important things, and we're not going to be successful, sensitive, or really effective in reaching them and supporting them. So those are just a few of the things. The rest are on the list, and we'll be happy to answer any questions on that later. So again, language is very important. I know I'm really, what they say, a word geek, because I love to analyze language and see how it evolves, because we get better, right? When we learn how to be more respectful and more inclusive in our language. So we're all familiar with boys and girls, especially when we think about elementary schools, right? Separating by boys and girls. These books are for girls, these books are for boys. Only talking about moms and dads, assuming identity and structure. And then we look at, our upper grades where you have your homecoming ceremonies, you have your kings and queens, right? That's all language that we're comfortable with because it's been something that's been around for a while. But at the same time, we've been evolving, right? We've been getting better and better about having more inclusive language. And so on that journey, I want to encourage you to also think about other terms. For example, friends, scholars, readers. Why do we have to say boys and girls? I know with PBIS, often we go to scholars, or we use the school mascot, right? That's so much better than putting that stress on children as to, getting in line with boys and girls. There are other techniques. You can line up alphabetically by birthday, favorite color, so many things. In encouraging that all the toys in the, in the preschool or all the books, all the, support materials are for all students, right? Not saying, well, the girls can go over there and work on arts and crafts and the boys can go over here and work with the little trucks. We want to take that away and help them feel that it's okay to be interested in whatever is, their passion, so to speak. Always looking for those correct pronouns, be respectful and kind. And I know a local high school in the district where my kids attend, they actually changed it from meaning king and queen to royal court. So everyone was a member of the royal court. And it also created more equity because there were like four or five people who were all court members instead of just one being, the top king and the top queen. So these are simple things that we can include to be more respectful, to be more inclusive, and start to create that cultural shift. So this doesn't become just the best practice, but our everyday practice. So with identity support planning, this is where we're going to jump into the heart of what does this planning look like? This work started because we realized we needed tools and practices to support students in identifying what their needs were. We also recognized the skyrocketing suicide rates, and especially for this population. And so we know that where IDSPs are effectively introduced and practiced, the suicide rates are substantially lower. And we've looked at data nationally as well as locally. And that is one of the reasons that we are such proponents of this tool, because it is about the student, for the student. And as practitioners, I know that's where we're at. So there are lots of testimonies, evidence, and outcomes, again, as I mentioned. So those who are involved with IDSPs, we have higher college admissions, and that's because we have a significant increase in instructional time, an increase in academic access, because they're now putting more energy into that instead of their safety. Think about what it's like to have to always worry about your safety. How much energy do you have left to focus on math or algebra or calculus or your college admission? So unless you have allies who are there to support you and an environment where you feel safe, you can't focus on that. And so once we get to that point through an IDSP process and cultural shifts, this is the result. So we have an increase in extracurricular activities, more stability, social emotionally, reduced suicide risk. And also a decrease in victimization from peers. Because again, the peers start changing their behaviors and realize we're all in this together.
Okay, so one of the things that we like to talk about when we talk about identity support planning, one of the things that we say all the time is it's not about the form. It's about the relationship, right? When we're doing different kinds of planning, accommodations planning, 504 planning, some of that kind of stuff, we have a form, we have a very prescriptive thing we have to fill out, we have to meet these particular item checklists, and then also we have to meet with the student again in this much time and then in this much time. This one is actually much more free-flowing. It kind of depends on the particular student and what their needs are, right? So now that I've just told you it's not about the form, I want you to take out the form and take a look at the form. Now, what happened is Heidi and I worked on identity support plans specifically for schools almost 10 years ago, yeah. And there were items available. We pulled from a bunch of items, but they didn't really feel like they were very tailored towards schools and what students needed in schools. So we kind of started working over the years to try and perfect this in practice and in process. And the one that is now called secondary was just what we were using as a universal identity support plan. And then in the last couple years, we had the opportunity to develop this elementary plan, which is something that we've wanted to do for a long time, because in the field, what we have found is that in elementary, typically what happens is that these kids will come to us. When I say these kids, I mean transgender or gender diverse kids. When I say gender diverse, do y'all want me to explain that a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so gender diverse is a pretty broad term. And it might mean, kids who the way that they express is maybe not stereotypical for their gender or their sex assigned at birth, right? So if you have a baby, the baby is born, and the doctor says it's a boy, for example, and that boy comes to TK, and says, I'm a boy, and is wearing a princess dress, this is a diverse expression. It doesn't necessarily mean that this child is going to have a transgender identity or a non-cisgender identity. It's a diverse expression. When kids are in preschool, gender expression is like, we say it's gender utopia, because you just do what you like. You're like, well, I like shiny, and I like sparkles, and I like sequins, and I like pink. And a lot of times, like for our boys, we had made that inaccessible, right? And now you can go into like a big box store and find like a sequins shark that you can make go up, or dinosaur, right? So we're allowing for that in some ways, but it's still very gendered, right? The unicorns are on one side, the sharks and dinosaurs are over here, and we all know how that's supposed to associate, right? So when kids cross those boundaries, that's a diverse expression. Does that make sense? When you're thinking more like about, high school age kids, and you see kids who are identifying in different ways, maybe they identify as non-binary, or maybe they just come to school in nail polish, exactly. Earrings, long earrings, I've seen that a lot recently. So that would be kind of a diverse expression, okay? But not all of those kids are gonna need some sort of intervention or support in this way. So when we're talking about elementary school, kids who are coming in with a transgender identity, typically we find out about them at two specific periods of time. One is when they're just starting school, maybe it's TK or kinder, and that's when they come to enroll, and their parent or guardian will call the administrator and be like, I'm enrolling my child, and we need to have a conversation, right? And typically the parent's like, what do I do? How are you going to protect my kid, right? And so that's when we go through this process, and we bring the parent in, and we say, hey, we have this whole process at school where we can help support your family and your child, right? And I've had these conversations with parents, and the parent just starts crying. And I'll say, what are you worried about? Why are you crying? And parents have said to me, I just want my kid to be safe. I mean, most of us in here are parents. Yeah, so do we, right? I get that. And as school folks, we're like, absolutely. That's what we're here to do. Let's figure it out. Let's make a plan. So this gives you that plan, right? Another time that we see, I think, elementary school age kids come in for planning processes is more like as they get towards puberty. So depending on how high your elementary schools go, 5th grade, 6th grade, some of these kids will start coming out of school. How many of you are elementary? So you've seen some of this? Is this familiar? Yes. Yeah, okay. So that's why you have both of those documents, and the way the elementary one is written, it really gives you two options, like you can see even on that first page, if you're just doing it with the child, right? Or if you're doing it with the family, okay? But mostly when we go through this process, things to think about is we're only addressing areas that the student wants to address. If the student wants to change their name on a roster, then we figure out with the student, make a plan how to do that. Done. If the student wants, to go more into it, they want to have their parents come in and have a conversation. Maybe the student wants to play a sport within their identified gender. Then we're talking about all that stuff. Make sense? So it's very student-led, student-driven. And because of that, it's really about developing that relationship with that student and or that family. So instead of like, okay, I'm going to check in with you in 3 months or 6 months, I'm going to check in with that student again in about 2 weeks. If they're an elementary school kid, it's probably going to be in about 2 days, right? The younger the kid, probably more frequently you're going to check in until you really kind of know that they're stable, and also they know that they have access and that they have a partner in this process. Does that make sense? And because their needs are going to change over time, right? We might get a kid coming in having these conversations with us very early on, or maybe in middle school, and we're going to have that kid for another 6 years, right? So their needs are going to change over time. And as they move from middle school to high school, or if they matriculate from one to another, you're going to talk to them about having kind of a warm handoff, those kinds of things to make sure there's a continuum of care. Okay. All right, so this is kind of how we've broken down the process into 3 main things. The first thing you're going to do is connect. So I know we have a couple teachers in the room, but we also have some counselors and school psychs and administrators, right? So say you're a teacher and a student comes out to you in an essay. So your first thing might be to pull that student aside or say, hey, if you want to talk, you know, or you could write something on the essay. Hey, thanks for trusting me with this information. Do you mind coming to see me after class or whatever, right? And then that teacher has a referral pathway. I think it's important for teachers to know that this is not something that they have to do and figure out and coordinate and all that stuff. They're busy, right? But they can introduce the process to the student. Did you know we have a whole process at our district to help support you? Do you mind if I reach out to your school counselor or whoever it is at your site? Do you mind if I reach out to the school social worker, to our LGBTQ coordinator or liaison? And they can come and talk to you about it. By the way, this whole thing is confidential, so it's totally up to you, right? And then you get that referral or you get that phone call or you get that, hey, check in with this kiddo. And that's where you're gonna go and you're gonna connect with them, right? And so you'll meet them, kind of figure out what's going on, what do they need, what are they looking for, what kind of support do they need at school, explain the identity support planning process, let them know, you know, it's really up to them who comes to this meeting. You want to have a meeting, kind of talk to them about it, talk them through certain things. Are their parents aware? Who do they live with? Are the people that you live with, are your grown-ups aware? Why or why not? What does that look like? Would you like them, is there someone you would like to attend with you, right? So I worked kind of in a liaison role. I would always say, can I invite your counselor? Counselor is important, right? So those are kind of the things you're going to walk through in that first initial. And then after that, you schedule the meeting. If the parents are coming, it takes a little bit longer to coordinate, but you get that meeting on the schedule as soon as you can. And then you go around and you kind of, talk through the basics. Obviously, you're going to use the student's affirmed identity throughout these meetings, right? Like you will use their affirmed name and their affirmed pronouns, okay? If there are people in the meeting that are not doing that, then I would really kindly correct them, okay? And so then you'll go through the parts of the form that the student is interested in talking about. And then the implementation part. What did you decide? What do you need to do? What is it gonna take to do that, okay? And then there you're in all kinds of different roles. You're advocating, you're educating, you're providing support, possibly to administrators, possibly to PE coach, activity supervisor, et cetera.
You become a tour guide.
Tour guide, yeah.
You will strategy or tools is to give students, a tour, a walk with them to, let's say, to the locker rooms and figure out what is the best area or where do they feel the most comfortable changing. Also, if you look at health statistics, our students are suffering from UTIs and other health issues. They're not eating because they don't want to use the restroom because, again, they're not feeling safe. So what is the nearest restroom in which class, and how can we set that up where maybe you leave 5 minutes early so you get a head start and you feel safer or whatever, however they determine works best for them. Again, they're driving this, but you know what it is, seeing is believing, right? So when you go on these tours with them and they start thinking about it, it really helps them to bring this to light and make it feel real. And that reinforces the integrity of the plan. And the other thing, again, when we said, it's all about the form, we have lots of questions on this form, and that's just a guide because when you're on the spot, let's say you're doing this a month from now or 6 months from now, you're not going to remember everything we talked about today. But with that form in front of you, hopefully it just, ignites that information for you, helps you remember, it guides you. And it's okay to leave some of it blank. And I know there are a lot of other forms we use in education that have legal implications. This is not one of them. So this is not about being completed. It's just about a tool that is a guide through the process.
I'm a school social worker, my training, And so, typically when we think about this stuff, sometimes we think about it as assessing, because that's like language that we use as a social worker. But we actually changed it to be a little bit more clear, because in the school setting, we are not assessing, to just be clear, we're not assessing the student's identity. That's not our role. Our role is to affirm and support, right? They're coming to us with this information and we're saying, thank you so much for trusting me with this information. How can I support you? Like, that's basically where we're coming from. Does that make sense? So the focus is really on student safety, the school environment, the peers, the circle of support. These are the things we're going to be focused on. The facilities, like Heidi mentioned. So a lot of times these kids will avoid the bathrooms, and they'll get UTIs or kidney infections. Bathrooms are a major source of stress for a lot of these kiddos. And so trying to find ways to reduce barriers, like the locker room tour. This is something that I started doing with all secondary kids. I'll even walk them through their schedule. Like at the beginning of the year, if they're at a different school, let's walk through your schedule, find out where the bathrooms are. Let's go in. Sorry, this is the boys' bathroom. I can't go. You go ahead with this counselor or whatever. Let me know if I can come in. Right? There's things like this that you're doing that are showing respect for the student's identity. And then also, they're able to see, okay, they're making an informed decision now because they know what they're choosing, right? Same with locker rooms. Where do they feel most safe? What accommodations can we make? A lot of times our kids are assigned to a locker in a locker room for PE based on their period of PE and their student ID number or last name, something like that, right? That's how they're assigned. But we can make accommodations, right? If we need to. Some students are going to feel a lot more comfortable in front of the big window. Do y'all know that there's a big window where the coaches and teachers sit behind in their office? Some students want to be kind of in front of the window just to make sure that makes them feel more safe. Some students want to be like way away. Yeah, way far away from that window, right? And some students want to be where their friends are. That's where they feel safe. And just a note here about students who may feel uncomfortable changing in an area where there is a transgender student, because that comes up too. And typically, in my experience, what I see is parents contacting the school, parents being uncomfortable. Maybe the student comes home and says, hey, there's a trans kid in my locker room. I've had this come up before where actually the student was not trans. And it just was something that the kid thought, and then it created this whole thing. And as an administrator, you're kind of like, well, I can't tell you who's in the locker room. And also, you should know that by law, yes, this is possible and has been legally mandated for over 10 years now, or 10 years now. And I'm sure what's happening before that too, we just didn't know, right? So, but we can, any student for any reason can contact the school or the district or their parent and say, hey, my student needs an increased level of safety in the bathroom. And that is something that we can address for that student, right? So we don't have to say, oh, we have to pull this kid that we just did a support plan with out of the bathroom. We say, okay, let's make a restroom plan for your student. Let me show you where the restrooms are. Let me show you where, all gender restrooms are. Those kinds of things. So that's how you can work around those kinds of issues. Any questions? What to do with the plan? So the plan is private. So I wouldn't do it digitally. I've never done these digitally. I've never emailed them to people. I just think that's like a number one way to make something not confidential is by putting it on the internet. I keep a file of these, and in districts where I have been responsible for doing them, there was a locked file in the district as well. Every district kind of will come up there with their own procedure. Sometimes it's just like a liaison or a coordinator that does all of them. Sometimes it's counselors at every site are trained to do them, right? How many of you have done one of these before? How many of you have done a lot of these? Yeah. So the people who get a copy, the student if they want one, right? Sometimes they don't want one because it's like a hot potato. Sometimes they do. the parent or caregiver, if they're there. And a lot of times I do have parents come. There's a lot of parents who are involved. Just for the record, there's a lot of supportive parents, right? And a lot of times I have kids that I have learned about or who were referred to me because they came into the school site with their parent to register and they're like, that's not good enough. And then that school calls the district and the district's like, oh, well, we can do better. You know, we have all these resources, we have more than that. The site just wasn't totally aware. So a lot of times parents are actually advocating for their kids on behalf of their student, right? Whoever your person is who's facilitating it, the safe person on campus should keep a copy. And then the process is kind of up to your school. It doesn't go in the CUME. It doesn't go in ARIES or Synergy or your SIS system. I wouldn't even say that you did one, right? Because each plan will be different on who can know. And that will change over time. Okay, and just some language, some tips on some language. How many of you have all the trauma-informed training? Most of us? This is a trauma-informed process. It's very much student-led. It's very much informed consent-based. It's very much about listening, right, to what's needed and providing support where necessary. Also, we can educate or, make students aware of what opportunities there are for them. Like they might not realize that they do have the right to play a sport if they want to. They may not realize that, there's different things that are available to them. I used to always ask a question at the end of doing an identity support plan with a student. I would always say, part of the questions in there, one of them is there anything we haven't talked about that you're interested in bringing up? But I always say, is there anything that you never thought you could do, that you want to do? And I had a freshman one time answer me and say, I want to swim. I'm a swimmer, I want to be on the swim team. We were like, okay. And that kid was on the swim team. Super successfully, and then transferred to a more rigorous, higher program. Is now in a 4-year college. Ran the newspaper at his high school. Just basically took full advantage of school, where before they were barely even showing up. So making these opportunities available is how we can create equity for these kids, right? So some of the things that we might say, thank you so much for trusting me with this information. I think that's a great place to start. Just honoring the information that's been shared, right? Because again, our kids didn't change. They didn't change who they are, they're just letting us in. Does that make sense? We want to make sure that you feel safe and supported at school. That's where we're coming from, that's our stance. You're in charge of this process. This is yours. I used to tell kids, you're my boss in this, I work for you. What do you want to do, right? I recognize that you are the expert in your own safety. So just a note on that real fast, just a little explanation to give you some context around that. If you are a queer person or a queer kid, you become an expert in evaluating risk because you're doing it all the time. You're doing it all the time. Is it safe to sit here? Is it safe to walk here? Is it safe to go to that bathroom? Is it safe to write this essay? Is it safe to, tell my friend that I have a crush on them or whatever? They're constantly evaluating risk. So they know better than I do which bathroom is safe and why. They know, right? So we have to acknowledge that they're going to have a lot to say about that, and that information is important for us to hear. Also, making sure that they know that the information is confidential. By law, I'm only allowed to share this with the folks that you give me permission to share it with. So let's talk about who needs to know and why, right? And talk through that. Make sure that they're aware. I have a note here, and I just want to say this I think this goes without saying, but we never ask about bodies. You never ask about a kid's body. There's a lot of different ways to be a person. Transgender people, there's not like one way. There's not a pathway with an ending, and once you get to that finish line, then you are officially transgender. It doesn't work that way. right? So like, I think a lot of people have a misconception that surgery is involved. And I would say that's very uncommon, actually, especially for children. That's like, does not really occur. It's not a thing, right? So it's not like, where are you in the process? It's like the person who comes in front of you and says, I am this person, that's who they are in that moment. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions?
I was just curious, in this time that you are having this discussion, reassuring students, do you ever discuss, or is it important to also discuss with the student how to address when school staff or people they may consider superiors are not engaging with them in or acknowledging, say for example, I mean, this happened to my child personally, right? Dressed in the way she is appropriate, walks to the girls' restroom, the teacher stops her and says, no, you can't go to that restroom, you need to go to that restroom. And as empowered as a student may feel about a lot of these things, just I think we all get caught off guard sometimes, right? So is that part of your, how do you address that in your training?
Well, essentially, that is what the IDSP is, about addressing all those things. So we can't always predict what might happen. Like, let's say we had a great IDSP planning last week and then this situation occurs.
Yeah.
But we want that student to go to their ally, to the person they feel comfortable with and say, hey, by the way, this happened. And so hopefully then a new plan can be devised to talk to that teacher and help them understand, they need to be open and inclusive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And to that point, like sometimes, we'll do a training for an entire school staff, but the activity supervisors aren't there. And those are the folks out at lunch that are like, no, you can't use that bathroom, right? So that's something that we have kind of in our strategies in a further slide, but just a reminder, like we gotta make sure that we're educating those folks. PE teachers are a big one. A lot of times with PE teachers, what I hear, and I've met just with groups of PE teachers on several occasions, and what comes up the most is fear of impropriety. Okay, so what I mean by that is I don't want to see bodies, right? Which is fair. And it's a conversation that's easy to have because it's easy to explain, like, that's not what's happening here. Like, these kids aren't trying to show you and everyone else, right? They're just trying to change for PE. So that really doesn't come up. It really hasn't come up at all. And then further to your point, another thing that you can do is this is like in your ongoing, because really what you're talking about there, that's a humiliating situation for the kid. Humiliation, how many of you have been humiliated in your life? That's a rough one. It's like extreme embarrassment tinged with shame, right? And lack of power, right? So just to pull out the feelings, because I'm a social worker, it's hard in that moment to find your voice. I don't know that I could. But having a safe person on campus that they can say, hey, or I've had students come to me and say, hey, this teacher will never use my affirmed name. Well, that's against the law, right? So then that becomes an employment issue, right? And so then you're talking to the administrator who's then having a conversation about what the law is, right? So there are things we can do around that. I also have worked with students specifically who are having some peer issues. And we've done modeling and role playing and like, okay, I'll be that guy and you be that guy. And okay, I come up to you and what do you say, right? And just kind of practicing some of that. So there's a lot of different strategies that we can use. But in that particular situation, I think it's really an education where we have to make sure that everybody is trained. Regardless of whether or not there is a kid on campus that we are aware of who identifies, everyone needs to know what's expected and what the law is, at least, at the bare minimum, right? So some districts, even if they can't get somebody out to every site to train, they're creating like Nearpod training, something that Vern is doing over at Santa Ana, with what the laws are and some examples of that. Also, the state is coming up with one. So at least people will have a baseline. It's not enough, but it's a baseline, right? It's way better than where we're at right now. Okay, want to practice? Okay, so we talked to you a little bit, gave you some examples before about what an elementary school identity support plan might look like, right? Like a parent comes in, we talked about that a little bit. I gave you a little example of how some of those have gone, right? Just a couple other tips on that, like say you sit down, you know, the parent's in the room, the parent gets emotional. You can take the kid somewhere else, right? Like maybe you have, typically there's an administrator in that or a school psych or both. And then maybe there's a counselor that can take the child to go see the prize box and the playground and all the super fun things that they're gonna experience at school. They can go meet their teacher or something. Well, you kind of get those feelings out with the parent. And that works in secondary too. Honestly, I've had times where the student and the family member is in the conversation and the family member is kind of airing all the anxiety. And I've said, you know what, how about if we get through this so that they can go back to class and then you and I can talk about this? Because quite frankly, there is not a whole lot of places for parents to go to get support on these topics, or even education or understanding. There's some that are doing a great job, and a lot of them were here today, so hopefully you picked up their flyers. But there's not a lot of options. And I personally have been through this and have called these places and can tell you it's hard to find support. There's a lot of information right now on the internet and on the news that is not accurate. But if you're trying to find out, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like, I really need some support, that's hard to find. So being able to kind of help parents find something that's appropriate or provide some of that, at least in an initial conversation, can be really, really helpful. Okay, so for a role play, we thought we would role play with you as our student. So those of you that have done a lot of these, what do you find as far as students being willing to share with you about this stuff? Fairly easy? Difficult? Depends? How's it go for you? I'm actually asking.
Depends on who's in the room.
Anybody else?
Bad. Who's gonna see this or who's gonna know about this? But if you have a good relationship with them, they're like, okay, these are my followers, these are pretty good.
Yeah. But I was just gonna say, usually when you're providing the space for them and they know that it's a safe space, and usually because they're like, whoa, you're asking me these questions? Like, wow, this is a great space in here. And it's more open.
Did y'all hear that?
No one's ever cared.
Over there? Yeah. They just, Maureen says they just dump, right? Maybe they haven't been able to talk about it really. They've been holding this on their own, on their shoulders, you know, heavy stuff, right? So just being there and being willing to listen and being supportive, and from the bat, you know, from the get-go, letting them know that the process is confidential and that they're in charge of it, but you're there to do whatever you can to support them. I feel like that has been my experience too. Students are super willing to be open.
I think it also goes the other way, where I've had students that are like, well, whatever you want, doesn't matter, whatever you want. So like even going over the questions and then like revisiting it later, like this, like let's talk about these things, but let's revisit it later. So they have, because if this is the first time, like it's a lot. Yeah, and it's like, well, they need almost a guide to walk them through that. And they are their own guides sometimes, and so giving them a chance to pull those questions, think about it, and come back.
That's a great point. And you can offer to have them, they can take a copy if they're not afraid to take a copy at that first connection meeting. You can say, hey, you can look through this. This is some of the stuff that we might talk about, but it's really up to you what we talk about. And then that gives them a chance to think through it. Another thing is the meeting, you know, I think we put on there, you know, typically you're going to have more than one meeting because like you're saying, yeah, sometimes it's the first time they've ever thought about that question before, right? And so they're not sure. And a lot of times what I get from students is I don't want to be a burden. I also get that from parents. we didn't want to call you because we didn't want to be a burden, right? Why didn't you call your principal, when your child was being bullied? We didn't want to create problems. We didn't want to be a burden, right? So just being able to kind of reach out and address that quickly, I think, can be helpful, right?
I think many of the students are also not aware of what rights they do have, and what could be available. Maybe just at that moment they're being bullied or something else has come up. They want to address it, not even realizing, oh, I could, ask for this or I could ask for this and I'd be supported. It's a whole new world.
All right, so let's role play, and I'm gonna just kind of be the facilitator, and then y'all can answer from, based on your experience of maybe what a student would say, or based on, what you kind of want to process around with the group. Does that make sense? So when I meet with a student, I always introduce myself first. My name is Lindsay. My pronouns are she, they. I work with the district. I work almost entirely with LGBTQI+ students. Do you know what that means? And I always say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex, even when they say yes, right? But I also say I don't exclusively work with those students. Not all the students I see identify, but a lot of them do. So then they kind of have a sense of where I'm coming from, but I don't want them to feel cornered, right? That I'm saying this is how you identify, right? Because I don't know. And I'll say, as you know, because they have to have given consent for me to be there in the first place. As you know, your whoever it is, reached out to me and asked me to come and talk over the identity support plan with you. Do you remember that? Yeah? Just kind of try and get them talking. Do you mind telling me your name and how you identify, or what pronouns you use? So y'all, what do you want to do? How about we use the name Alex? What identity or pronouns do we want Alex to have? They, them. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with me, Alex. I really appreciate that. Did you know that we have this process at school? Is this something that you want for people to start calling you at school, right? How old should Alex be?
14.
14? What's 14, a freshman? Yeah? All right, let's do a freshman. In the bell curve of risk, 9th grade is way high. So the first thing that we want to talk about is what's available to Alex at school. Did you know that we have the ability to change your name in our system? No. All right, well, let me tell you how that works. Or even before we get to that, we would say, Alex, who knows about this? Who do you live with?
My grandma.
Yeah.
Your grandma. Does your grandma know?
Yep.
Okay. How come?
She'd freak out. She's older. I don't.
Okay. You're concerned. Okay.
Because there's not a word transgender in our language.
There you go.
Oh, that's good.
That's a good one.
That one. That's why.
Okay. All right. So do you feel like you'd want to bring your grandmother in to this process?
Not yet.
Just freshman in college.
Eventually, but she would die.
Well, just so you know that everything we talk about here is confidential, and I'm not allowed to share anything that you share with me with anyone else without your permission. And then I go through the confidentiality things. That's the social worker thing. So for those of you that don't do that or don't know those, it's like, y'all know those, right? Yeah. Unless you tell me that someone's hurting you, you want to hurt yourself, someone's hurting someone else, or you're wanting to hurt someone, then I got to get help, right? But everything else that we talk about, like as related to school, that's between you and me. Okay? So you get to decide who's here. Is it okay if I bring your counselor into our meeting so that we can talk about this? Do you know your counselor?
Or is there someone else at your school that you talk to that you trust that you'd like to be here? Maybe your regards teacher,
Sometimes students will want to bring in another family member, like an auntie or a cousin. Yeah, so you can give them that opportunity. The counselor is important because they control the schedule. And the schedule is very important, right? Counselors know which teachers are going to be better, right? Am I right? How many counselors in here? You know, you got the power. You got the power of the schedule, seriously. All right, so that's how we would set up the meeting, right? And then Alex has seen your face, knows who you are, knows we're going to talk about it, okay? And then when you get to the actual day that you're supposed to meet, you come in, you're meeting with the counselor. You know, you don't want to have like a big panel of people there, right? You want to make it as comfortable for the student as possible. A lot of times they'll go, you know, if there's like a table, a lot of times, you know, think about where you sit, those kinds of things. You want to sit next to the student, you know. I've been in meetings where there's like a lot of grown-ups. Sorry, that's a kid word. A lot of adults in the room. And I'll just go sit next to the student. Because that's really, this is who we're talking, this is what this is about, right? Give them the opportunity to have a voice. It makes clear that they're the one we're going to listen to. And so you can say, hey, how's it going? It's so good to see you. Thanks for meeting with me again. And then you're talking first probably about names and pronouns. So Alex, I know you shared with me that you use they, them pronouns. Does anybody know that at school? Is that something that you would like to consider changing at school? Did you know that we have the ability to change that? Alex, did you know?
No.
Sorry.
So you can change or correct the name that we use for you here at school. And also your gender identity, right? You have that ability. When we do that, it will show up in Aries or Synergy or whatever you use in your SIS system. It's going to show up. So like your teachers will all see that. So if you go to math class, they're going to see Alex. If you go to language, they're going to see Alex, right? And so they'll know that's how they address you. It will also show up in Parent Square or the Parent Portal or the Parent View. I have a lot of kids who tell me no one's going to see that. So like in your specific experience with Alex, with the grandma,
She won't see.
who speaks a different language, is she looking at Parent Square?
Probably not.
If she hasn't translated.
She probably doesn't.
If it's available on her way.
So that's what, I mean, in my experience, I would say that that person's who they've described as their family isn't going to see that. But they might. And so I would also tell Alex, you know what that means also is like if you're late for school and the robo system calls your house, they're going to call for Alex, you know, so they can think through this stuff. And if Alex is like, this is a problem. Wait, hold on, this is a problem. These are things that I cannot risk. Great, okay. So here's some other things that we can do. You can notify your teachers. We can help you with that if you want to. You know, we can make it, we can help you make it so that the majority of people here are familiar with your affirmed identity. And that's what you're going by here, you know. So you're giving them options, trying to figure out how you can best work within the systems that we have to navigate. So even though in the state of California, the student has the right to keep this private from anyone, our systems aren't there yet, right? And there's a lot of us that have been advocating for this for a long time, and they're still just not there yet, right? How many emails, how many phone calls, how many, you know, liaisons. And sometimes it's like, well, this system is based in a different state. You know, a couple of them are based here, and they still haven't fixed this stuff, right? So it is something that we need to go through with the student. We really need to get to know the student to know what's going to best support them. And this is something that frequently changes over time. Because again, you'll have a student who comes out at school and they become a little bit more comfortable, and so they're comfortable being out in other areas as well. Does that make sense?
So in the event that Alex wants their pronouns changed,
Yes.
and grandma does not, who do we defer to?
Who do you think?
Students do.
Yeah, the kid gets to choose. It's their identity, yeah, absolutely. Good question, thank you. So one of the things that we always want to assess is safety. right? Is there anywhere that you don't feel safe? Yeah, and then we'll say which class or which classes. Is there any particular teacher? Is there, and then you're gonna have a conversation about that. Where do you feel safe, where do you not feel safe? Who knows about this at school? Do they have peer support, right? Do they have adult support? And we know, we quoted the parent that said it's like walking into a hailstorm. And Heidi was talking about having these umbrellas of safety, right? So it's like you have this affirming staff person over here. You have this group of friends at lunch. Each of those places provide support, right? They're all necessary. The more that we can get and the more we can connect them, the better. So kind of assessing that. What is your circle of safety? What is your circle of support inside and outside of school? Okay, and then facilities. What facilities are you using at school? Do you eat or drink? I always ask that. Do you eat at school? Do you drink water? What do you guys think?
No, I'm not hungry.
You're not hungry?
Not that a lot. I'm not hungry. I'm just not hungry at school.
After school time.
Yeah.
Are you willing?
Yeah, I like food. Yeah.
Do you drink while you're on campus? Do you drink water? So a lot of our kids will avoid that stuff so they can avoid the restroom, right? So bringing that up, pointing that out, asking about that. Is there a restroom on campus that you feel safe using? Have you ever been into, so this student uses they, them pronouns. Let's say they tell us they identify as non-binary. Have you ever been into the boys' bathroom or the girls' bathroom? Have you seen our all-gender restrooms here? Right? We all have all-gender restrooms at all of our sites.
Yeah. They don't.
In our schools that were built 100 years ago.
No, they don't.
But we do have some, right? And sometimes a student will feel safe there and sometimes they won't, and it kind of depends. Like if a student wants to use a bathroom in the health office and you're at a busy high school and you walk in and there's 14 kids waiting and there's a nurse there and the student feels like they have to say, hey, remember me? I'm the kid who has the special thing on the thing and you let me, remember? Psst. That's a barrier. That kid is not going to use that bathroom, right? So having ways, like a lot of times your nurses will have a pass. You just give that student a pass and that student might feel comfortable just showing their pass, going and using the restroom, If that's a restroom that they've chosen, we can't force any of them. We can't say, oh, you have to use this one. It's really up to them because again, they become the expert in their own safety and risk, right?
The classes also help with the activity supervisors or people who are not trained. They know that a pass means there's a kind of price when the situation goes. So that's also.
All schools, are they required to have an all-gender restroom? Because I thought they weren't.
So any single bathroom where it's a one person at a time kind of a facility should be labeled as all gender, or a lot of people are doing gender neutral, some sort of labeling like that. Any gender kind of a thing. That's a building code. So a lot of schools are updating that. Some schools have a lot of authority over this stuff. Like they have a lot of discretion. Okay, so I have APs that have put in number locks, and they'll give them to students. Or I have APs that have let student have a key, right? And that was to a staff bathroom in a situation, it was a small kind of continuation school environment. But so, administrators can come up with solutions here. And we haven't had any issues with that. Sometimes people are worried about issues that are really discipline issues. And then you would address it as a discipline issue, which is not related to this thing that we're doing here, right? So.
I even had one with a code, security code. So the student had the security codes and it worked.
That's good. So, but like the all stall bathrooms, the multiple stall bathrooms aren't required to be all gender?
They're not required, but they can be.
And
they can be.
Designate an area of.
That's correct.
The by gender, whatever model for, we can convert that into?
Yes, you can't. You may have multi-stall, right? So the bathrooms that we're all used to as public restrooms that you go in and there's like 3 or 4 different stalls. You can have those be all gender. And there's school districts who do have that. That's what students are going to find when they go to college. P.S. There's a lot of that at college, right? But there are school districts that are doing that now. I know people at your school district have considered that. Yeah, so it's definitely an option.
There's also new legislation that is coming that will say that schools have to have all gender restrooms.
Did you hear that?
Sorry.
So it will be required.
But if it's to be built, or it will have to be.
Well, it's gonna use convert bathrooms anyway. Well, most schools don't have space or funds to build more bathrooms, so they'll just convert the bathrooms.
So I feel like when this went into effect, I don't know if there are any people here, but like the staff bathrooms were, the signs were removed and it was all gender, and people like were upset and took down the signs and were like, no, this was a female bathroom. You will not use my bathroom as males. And I'm like, we're all adults here. This is within the staff area. And then you had to key into that bathroom too. It was like, you had to key into 2 places. Like, why are you upset about this? And I don't know. It was a huge thing.
And some places it's not a thing at all.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on the culture at your site.
It depends on
Preparing staff, have a meeting beforehand and have a discussion.
Yeah, there was that too. It was just kind of changed. They were like ripped
change
off the
always
wall, and you could
goes
see like
people.
the remnants of the paint that had been there, whatever. So yeah, it was very like shocking, and I think that is the major thing, is just informing people, letting them know, this is gonna happen.
Yeah.
We're gonna do this on this day.
And really, best case scenario, having more options is better, right? It would be great if we had lots of options. So like say Alex, our non-binary kid, has a place where they feel comfortable. They're not picking between boys and girls, right? Okay, in the interest of time, because I see our panelists are trickling in over here and we want to get their voices to you. I want to wrap this up, but extracurricular activities, you definitely want to touch on that. Are they in ROTC? Are they in, dance, drama, sports? Do they want to be cheer? All of that stuff. Are there overnights? Thinking through that kind of stuff with the student. Typically, the students have thought about that, and they have some ideas on what feels safest to them, and those typically work, right? So, okay, and then the last thing I want to say on this is, we kind of already talked about how I end it, which is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to bring up? And then I also will say, is there anything that you feel like you can't do, right? But the other thing is, on the back, there's a spot for you to write action items and who's responsible and when they're supposed to happen. So if a student is making a name change in their school information system, I typically will go over there, because even if you're lucky enough to be at a district where those registrars and office managers have all been trained, that was probably last year, and this is maybe the second time they've done it since. They probably don't remember, right? So I just have that with me, and I just take it over there and go, hey, do you mind if we do this real fast? It takes 30 seconds, done. You can make sure it's done right. You can say, hey, can you print one out so I can show it to the student, right? And then you're able to give them their demographics page with their name corrected, right? And that's kind of like the best part.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
When things get changed on Aries, in my experience, it's like you have like an AKA and there's like a parentheses.
That's different.
Like,
That's a different.
Alex used to be Alejandra.
Yeah, that's when it's incorrectly done.
Okay, so
That's an alias, and that doesn't meet privacy
So that's-
requirements.
so that it's not an alias.
It's not an alias.
That was my question.
Yeah, these systems have developed ways where you can do a name change, right?
And it's not like previously known as.
No.
Okay, good.
It should say Alex.
Okay, good.
And then the student will have told you whether or not they want to change the middle name. Sometimes the middle name is very gendered, and sometimes they want to update it, sometimes they don't. So you know exactly what it's supposed to say, and then you're able to show it to them. Most students don't know that they have the option to pick non-binary or to correct their,
Yeah, no.
that they don't know that that's a legal gender. So you always tell them that, these are the 3 that are available.
So
That's a good point. Feel like our schools So
most of the time, school districts should have this in process where when you make this update in Aries, it should filter out to all the things. It should filter to their badge, it should filter to their email address, it should filter to their online personas. If it doesn't, then those are things that you need to correct. So you can tell the student when you're doing this, hey, if it doesn't update in these places, let me know, right?
That's my next thing.
And then that's how you address it. Question?
Question for overnight trips.
Yeah.
I feel like the district has strict policies on, it has to be same genders in the rooms. What if they haven't updated to their
Aries, yeah.
Aries, but we know on the IDSP that it should.
So the student has the right to stay based on their identified gender. That's their legal right to do that, regardless of what it says in Aries.
Okay.
Okay. That's good to know.
And it depends on where you're going. Like sometimes your contact, say it's 6th grade camp. A lot of times I get phone calls, it's like, oh, the camp doesn't know that, right? It's like, well, here is the code, send this to them, A lot of times camps have dealt with this stuff. So they actually have ideas and have some,
Policy.
Correct. So if it has to come up, then that can be a conversation, but they don't even need to know. It's not necessary that they know. In fact, based on privacy concern.
This is totally specific to my subject area, but we just adopted a new textbook in our district, and it's virtually impossible for students to, once they've registered for this textbook, to change any sort of information that they signed up with. So if they misspell their name, I had to go through like a 45-minute chat to get their name corrected, and I posed this question of like, hey, I have this kid, Alex, that wants to be known as Alejandra now, and what do I do about that? And they gave me the runaround. They're like, oh, we need to escalate this, and it's been 2 or 3 weeks that I'm like, well, what's going on with this? So how do we now navigate that? That's like a very specific question, but
It's an advocacy piece. Yeah.
I know it seems like it's very no-brainer. Like, come on, really? Like they had them last year, and now they're identifying as something else now, and they should be able to change that. And it's because they created their profile last year that.
You have the opportunity also to elevate that at your district into your curriculum folks. Yeah.
What district?
Indiana Unified.
Oh, okay. So, talk to me and I will get David Lofink on it and we'll have it settled for you.
David Lofink.
Yeah. And I'm Vern Reinhardt.
Oh, hi, Vern.
Hi.
I've met you via Zoom.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. About the implementation process, right? There's some suggestions we're going to talk about, but there will be things on the implementation plan that need follow-up. And ideally, if the student is open to tell the teachers, we recommend that there is follow-up with the individual teachers so that they know exactly what's going on. Keeping them in the loop makes them feel like they're part of the process, and so often they're more willing to be supportive and accommodate. The other thing is, when we're looking at the idea of being uncomfortable and unsafe, they're not the same. Yeah. And so students, whether they're our gender diverse students or our cisgender students, might say, I feel unsafe. I feel uncomfortable. I don't want to be in this bathroom. I don't want to change in front of these students. Either way, and I hate to always talk about the restroom, but we're going to go back there one more time. But the all gender restrooms are also great for cisgender students who say they're not comfortable.
Yeah.
So when someone brings up, why are we, having this restroom for this one particular group, that restroom is actually useful or helpful for all students of all gender. And so again, we just want to emphasize that unsafe is much different or uncomfortable. And often the adults on campus are really the folks who feel the most uncomfortable. Our students are really supportive and really allies and standing up for their peers and often pushing them forward. They're not uncomfortable, so let's make them a part of the process and let's give them opportunities for voice as well. So, again, working with the parents, just real quickly, just enforce reiterate the laws, that there's a code, but again, that this is about including all students in education and giving everyone an opportunity to thrive, and that this is about that mutual trust.
And we know you want to talk about parents. We want to talk about parents too, but we want to get to a break so we can get to the panel, and we'll definitely talk about that with our panel in a minute, okay? Also, you have this in your packet, but when we're talking about some of the concerns, we talked about some of this stuff with the myths that we talked about earlier, myths versus fact. But again, identity is not sexually explicit. Who you are is not talking about sexually explicit things. It's not the same thing, right? So learning how to respect people, you know, this is what we teach at school, right? Learning about kindness.
I think also when these parents who are upset, whether for whatever reason come to you and they're escalated, we do what we always do, right? Just give them a moment to say what they need to say, so they can, you know, get that emotion off their mind, and then de-escalate the process, and then figure out what is it that's really the concern. What is the fear here, and how can we address that? But also understanding that we're here to serve all students.